Amen. I continue in the book of Acts regarding the manifested power of God, the way in which the Lord has demonstrated in various ways, in various times through the early church. And now as we reflect on this experience that Paul and a number of the disciples, those who were traveling with him, on his way to, the intention is to get to Rome, as you saw in chapter 27. We're going to be looking at the rest of chapter 27 and the first 10 verses of chapter 28 in this portion, part 2 of the light of God in the storm. I'd like to look at just the last few verses of the passage we had last week in chapter 27, verses 23 through 26, in which the Apostle Paul has given assurance to those who were traveling together in the storm that they were experiencing about a vision that he received. And verse 27, he says, verse 23 rather, Paul says, "For there stood by me this night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve, saying, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar, and indeed God has granted you all those who sail with you. Therefore take heart, men, for I believe God that it will be just as it was told me. However, we must run aground on a certain island.'" To understand that the Apostle Paul puts his confidence in the Lord, in God. He understands that there were those with him who were not God-fearing, who did not know the Lord. And so in a way, he's introducing both himself and this vision that he had, and giving credit to the God that he serves. And he tells them that we will survive this storm, but we will run aground on an island, a certain island. Now, you notice that Paul does not say what that island is, because I don't believe he knew. The Lord had not revealed it to him. But he's confident of God's faithfulness regarding his word. One more view of the map, which I presented last week, and toward the center of it, right in the center of it, is really where they are right at this point in Acts 27. They had left Fair Havens. The intention was to go to the port city of Phoenix. They never made it there because the storm was raging and just pulled them out further and further into the sea. And for 14 days, they just sailed about. And neither the stars were appearing at night or the sun was able to help them in terms of navigating, in terms of knowing where they were. But let's continue with verse 27. "Now when the 14th night had come, as we were driven up and down in the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the sailors sensed that they were drawing near some land. And they took soundings and found it to be 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little further, they took soundings again and found it to be 15 fathoms. Then, fearing lest we should run aground on the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, when they had let down the skiff into the sea under pretense of putting out anchors from the prow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, 'Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved.' Then the sailors cut away the ropes of the skiff, and it fell off, and let it fall off." So the situation is not really getting any better, and there's the concern that they're going to run aground. Now, this reference here to run aground on the rocks in verse 29 is not in the same idea and the same understanding as when you're running aground onto an island or onto a beach. They were concerned that there were, certainly rocks out in the various parts of the sea, and if they would hit those rocks, it would destroy the ship, and there would be no place to go except the water. And so they were taking soundings. They were coming to understand that the seabed was rising, and so that there's a possibility of some underwater rocky island of some type or bar, that they would be in peril. And the idea of some of the soldiers, some of the sailors, was to escape on the skiff. That was in essence, to be used as a lifeboat. The skiff was actually used when the ship was offshore, that they would use that smaller boat to navigate onto land and then make their way back to the boat. They were using it as an escape route, and it was just for themselves. They were saying, okay, well, you guys, we're not all going to fit on the skiff, so we're just going to take it, and we're going to tell you that we're just going to drop some anchors, going to use the skiff to help us drop anchors elsewhere to sort of secure the ship. And it was sort of understood that this is what they were doing. And the Apostle Paul went to the centurion and to the soldiers and pleaded with them, saying, everybody needs to stay on the boat. Everybody needs to stay on the ship. I think for two reasons he was saying this. First of all, is because this is what the Lord had indicated to him in this vision through this angel, that everyone will be saved, but Paul understood that they needed to stay together. But I think there was a second reason, and that is that these were sailors who were leaving the ship. And the sailors were the experts as to what to do. Okay. Even though they were essentially helpless, they needed to have those who could run the rigging and those types of things. These were the experts. It wasn't the prisoners. It wasn't the soldiers. It was the sailors, and the sailors were the ones who were leaving. And so, however it worked out, the centurion received that message and said, hey, get rid of this skiff so there's no temptation. And so they cut it off and it drifted away. In verse 33, and as day was about to dawn, Paul implored them all to take food, saying, today is the 14th day you have waited and continued without food, and eating nothing. Therefore I urge you to take nourishment, for this is for your survival, since not a hair will fall from the head of any of you. And when he had said these things, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. And they were all encouraged, and also took food themselves. And in all, we were 276 persons on the ship. So when he had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and threw out the wheat into the sea. So this development, this portion, this is 14 days and 14 days of enduring this tremendous storm, and there's an indication here that they had not eaten. The stress and the anxiety had led them to not even desire food. And Paul is saying now, hey, let's get something to eat. Fear not. Consider that what I'm telling you, believe what I'm telling you, not a hair of your head will be lost. Now that, of course, is an expression, but still, it's a rather profound statement that he's making. He's speaking of a confidence that they certainly did not have. He is trying to encourage them to have hope, which they had lost long before. You see, toward the beginning of this experience in the storm, they had thrown off even their tackle. Luke says that they threw the tackle with their own hands into the boat. In other words, it wasn't lost by accident. They did it on purpose. They're trying to lighten the load of the ship. And here, with the encouragement of Paul, they eat, they are revived a bit in their spirit, and it says that after they had finished eating, they lightened the ship some more, and they threw off the wheat. Okay, that's probably what they were eating. Some of what they were eating. Paul is eating bread, but it was a practice to roast wheat, and as part of a meal. And anyway, they're throwing the wheat into the sea. You know why the wheat was on board? Because that was the load of merchandise that they were transporting. This particular type of ship was known for carrying wheat in particular. It was sort of designed for that, from Egypt over, intending to go to Italy. And so now they're throwing their precious cargo out in order to lighten the ship. Let me make a note regarding this as well, is that the reason why they're lightening the ship is so that the anchors would be more secure. So the anchors would be more effective. Yes, they dropped anchor, but considering that the anchor is attached to a rope or even a chain, but if the weight of that vessel is very great and the wind is battering it, the mass that it is makes it much more difficult for that anchor to hold. But if it's light, that anchor is going to be more effective. And so this was part of the strategy of lightening the ship. That was the reason for it. Consider that in terms of our own experience, we don't have experiences on the sea, at least not in recent times. But to consider that, symbolically, the seas in life, the trials and the tribulations in which we face, and notice that Paul could have prayed that the Lord calm the seas and give them safe passage, but they were experiencing this. And there are times in our life in which we are facing these storms, as powerful as they can be and as frightening as they can be, and considering that we are in the palm of God's hand. Yet we do fear, we do have that stress of the unknown. There are times in which we may, our hope may dwindle. Lord, how is this going to be resolved? The Lord may tell us. And we consider that this is a word to us during those times of storm, that lengthy trial where we see no end to. The Lord says, I am with you, and you will endure. And you may need to lighten your boat. You may need to release those things that you considered precious and perhaps are good, but are weighing you down. And we regard how the Lord would use our anchor. May we not fight against the Lord in terms of where he is holding us, that anchor that he has. There's some things certainly that the Spirit would give us conviction that these things are, with or without a storm, that these are not to be part of your life. You're not to hold on to these things. In Hebrews chapter 12, in the first few verses, it gives the encouragement to throw off every sin that so easily besets us, so easily trips us up. Because we're running a race. Because we're to be faithful in running the course that the Lord has set before us. Consider that in the situation that's presented here in Acts, that the sailors had the opportunity, they had the ability to go against the word that was given to them. We see that they tried in the verses prior to this. They tried to get into the skiff and escape. Please understand that just because the Lord is with you, it doesn't mean that it's an automatic victory. It doesn't mean that this is smooth sailing and there's nothing I need to do. There are things that are required of us. And yes, while God is faithful and he will be with us, and that which he has determined will be accomplished, yet at the same time we can avoid unnecessary trouble. We need to be firm in terms of our allegiance with the Lord, that he is our anchor. And in the storms, there are times in which the Lord says, you need to rid yourself of this or that. It may be for a time, or it may be for forever. If these things are weighing you down, this relationship that you have esteemed very highly, you need to reconsider. You need to put in a different perspective, or break the ties with this person because they are causing you to remain in a place where you should not be. There may be a situation, I'm talking beyond addiction, or maybe outside of addiction, it's an obvious thing. An adherence to something, a practice, something that the Lord has shown you. You are toying with this. And it needs to be released. You need to let it go. You need to throw it into the sea so that your anchor will be effective. The light of God showing through us, his people, is as we walk in faithfulness to him. Yes, it affects others around us. Presented this last week, last Sabbath. It affects others around us, but it is also, the power of God is revealed effectively and powerfully as we walk in obedience to him. So the shipwreck happens. Verse 39, when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they observed a bay with a beach, onto which they planned to run the ship if possible. And they let go the anchors and left them in the sea, meanwhile losing the rudder ropes. And they hoisted the mainsail to the wind and made for shore. But striking a place where two seas meet, they ran the ship around. The prow stuck fast and remained immovable, but the stern was being broken up by the violence of the waves. Consider that they are now approaching the land. These earlier, they had taken soundings, and they found that it seems like the seabed is rising, meaning the possibility of either a sandbar or an island of land or something, or just some rocks. And here, now it's daytime. And it doesn't mean the sun is out. It means that they're able to at least distinguish some things, and they see a body of land. They don't recognize what it is because they don't know where they are. And they release their anchors. And so they're just drifting. They're just going where the waves are taking them. It says they loosen the rudder ropes. The rudder is essentially the steering mechanism for the boat. So they're just free floating here, headed for this ground, this land, this island, and they run into some rocks, and the rocks hold them fast. The prow is the very front of the ship, and they they're stuck there, and the stern is getting beaten to pieces by the waves. And there's wind too. So both the wind and the waves are just destroying this vessel. Luke makes reference to the two seas, and I'm using this map to point out most likely it was this Syrtis Minor and Syrtis Major. Not sure where their boundaries are, but there is Malta, where the ship had run aground, and most likely that's what this reference is. And so verse 41, and the soldiers planned to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wanting to save Paul, kept them from their purpose and demanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land, and the rest, some on boards and some on parts of the ship. And so it was that they all escaped safely to land. Okay, so Luke is recording the effort to get to the land. I find it very, very interesting that the soldiers considered that the prisoners were a risk, and they desired to kill them. Now, it's one thing to think that, you know, you're killing human beings. I mean, these are people made in the image of God, but in the eyes of Rome, a prisoner, it was okay to kill. I mean, he's just a prisoner. Remember, Paul was among the prisoners. He was one of them. And so the centurion, verse 43, indicates that Paul would be among those who were killed. And so I want to spare him. I'd like to keep him alive. Maybe the others aren't worth saving, but I want to keep this one alive. There's the other question as to why they would kill the prisoners if they escaped. Wouldn't it be a matter of, okay, well, we'll find them later? No, it was the understanding that if you let these prisoners go, it would be your life in their place. And so, wanting to safeguard themselves, they said, we would rather kill you than have the possibility of my life being on the line. So they all make it to shore, some swimming and some on parts of the boat that were headed toward the beach. But they all make it. We now come to chapter 28. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to look at the first 10 verses. They land safely on the island of Malta. From verse 1, now when they had escaped, they then found out that the island was called Malta. And the natives showed us unusual kindness, for they kindled the fire and made us all welcome because of the rain that was falling and because of the cold. And when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and laid them on the fire, a viper came out because of the heat and fastened onto his hand. When the natives saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to one another, no doubt this man is a murderer, whom, though he has escaped the sea, yet justice does not allow him to live. But he shook off the creature into the fire and suffered no harm. However, they were expecting that he would swell up or suddenly fall down dead, but after they had looked for a long time and saw no harm come to him, they changed their minds and said that he was a god. And this passage presents not only the condition of all the ones, the sailors and the prisoners and the soldiers, the Roman soldiers, that they were all safe, but it also indicates that those on the island, those Maltans, were treating them well. And we can see that their belief in supernatural. Their belief in terms of their spiritual understanding, although they had the idea that, there are gods, they didn't have any idea who God, the living God, was. This idea that, if you do wrong, you're going to suffer wrong. They were expecting Paul, after they witnessed, some of them witnessed him being bitten by this viper, this poisonous snake, venomous snake, that they thought that justice would not allow him to live. When that reference by Luke to justice, perhaps it should be in capital J for justice, because there was this idea of the goddess called justice, and that Paul was being subject to a judgment. He must be a murderer. Maybe they regarded murder as the highest offense, or offense of bringing about a sentence like this. But he just shook off the snake in the fire. And not sure that he had any, apparently he didn't have any symptoms. He didn't show any discomfort. And it says they were watching him for a long time. They were expecting him to have some sort of symptoms and ultimately to fall over dead, but he didn't. And so they now regarded him afterwards. He must be divine. He must be a god. Notice it is a god. They needed to have an encounter with the reality, with the truth of who the God of the Apostle Paul was. And then verses 7 through 10, the Apostle Paul has the experience of ministering to these very people. In that region, there was an estate of the leading citizen of the island, whose name was Publius, who received us and entertained us courteously for 3 days. And it happened that the father of Publius lay sick of a fever and dysentery. Paul went in to him and prayed, and he laid his hands on him and healed him. So when this was done, the rest of those on the island who had diseases also came and were healed. They also honored us in many ways, and when we departed, they provided such things as were necessary. So concluding in this passage, this portion, we see the power of God demonstrated through healing, through a demonstration of the covering of God, the protection of the Lord, or the Apostle Paul. The blessing of this hospitality gives an opportunity for the ministry of healing on the father of this nobleman, Publius. And then the witness of this, the word of this spreads. And others also want to come. They want to receive this blessing of healing. And I have no doubt that in addition to that touch of healing was a word from the Lord, was a word of testimony, was a presentation of the truth of this God and of the man Jesus and of his work on the cross and the atonement through his death. They received this. They responded by blessing them. They said that when Luke says that when they were departing, they provided everything they needed. This was, of course, the other ship, another ship. And we'll see more of this in our next message regarding the work of God, the provision of God, and considering what the Lord would do through the Apostle Paul and through all of the disciples, considering that the light of God in the midst of this storm was a demonstration of the power, God's power being manifested. But consider what it means for us. Consider this being but a reminder of the light of God in you. It may not be demonstrated, it may not be manifested by a miraculous way, what we would identify as something supernatural, but it is still evident. And the Lord's call to us is, may your light, the light of the glory of God, may it not be hidden. May it not be as put under a bushel basket. May you instead be like the city on a hill that shines for all to see. That the glory of God is known, that the power of God is evident in your life to his glory.
Amen.